Angola, a historical ally of Kinshasa, has entered a crowded war theatre in the volatile eastern DRC as it seeks to tilt the balance of power in favor of the incumbent president Felix Tshisekedi as he seeks re-election in December 2023. The decision to deploy troops came after a truce Angola recently brokered failed to end fighting as both sides accused each other of reneging on the terms.
Angola historically in the last 30 or so years has allied with Kinshasa. When Kabila Lawrence was at it, it was Zimbabwean, Angolan, Namibian forces for Kinshasa versus Rwandan, Ugandan, Burundian for a while, and even Chadian and Eritrean forces against Kabila. And so the history annals has it that Angola allies with Kinshasa. That's one. But there are some geopolitical reasons as well why Angola now. There are three Zoao, which are three Zoao names that are important to recall here. So in terms of the Tshisekedi geopolitical calculus of balancing the forces, where else is the heavyweights to put on the menzani to balance of East African?
Tshisekedi, who has openly rebuked the inept East African Community Regional Force in dealing with the M23 rebels under the overall command of Kenya's Major General Jeff Nyaga, believes that Angola could ramp up its firepower to deal with the outfit he accuses of being a proxy army of Kigali.
What did Tshisekedi emphasize was a neutral force should come and do an important task, which is called a verification mechanism, to look into two things: withdrawal of the M23's occupied territories and cantonment. That will usher in disarmament, demobilization, and then reintegration now. So that's the Nairobi peace process, on the one hand, is articulated around two issues. An East African Community Regional Force deployment, which is a military track approach. There's a diplomatic track approach, which is talks, the political mediation, dialogue. And there is a military track, which is really deployment. And the deployment is conditional. It is not, does not have what they call an offensive.
Uganda, which recently deployed troops in the flashpoint Bunagana at its border post in the south with DRC, told Kinshasa that it would avoid a shooting war with M23. President Museveni said at the end of last month.
Mandate is under the East African Community Regional Force, and this is the mandate we have to fulfill. We shall continue working as per the mandate given to us, as per the status of forces agreement signed, as per the mission agreement signed, what we call the status of mission agreement. So anything outside that is not our concern. We don't know under which arrangement the DRC will be deploying Angolan troops, and I don't think at the moment this is a case for us. But we shall continue to fulfill the mandate as given to us by the East African Community Heads of State conclave, which was in Nairobi, and follow it to the letter. If there are any changes, then our leaders will tell us on what to do.
However, whereas Uganda has recently enjoyed warm ties with the DRC government, its neutrality towards M23 has created suspicion among the political elite in Kinshasa, who expected the UPDF to confront the aggressor. A statement from the Angolan president's office said the soldiers will be deployed to help secure areas that have been held by the M23 rebel group and to protect ceasefire monitors.
The Angola mission in DRC, basically the mandate is to do verification, because there have been these accusations that Uganda, Rwanda are helping M23, and we have mechanisms that were put in place quite a while ago. The joint expanded verification mechanism under the ICGLR, and the idea is that to to either confirm or to find out basically about who is helping who. And whenever we have these issues to do with clashes between forces or help coming from outside the DRC, that mechanism is meant to do the verification.
The latest deployment raises the specter of a regional intrastate conflict which has previously haunted the country. Earlier on in 1996, Angola, which treated Mobutu Sese Seko as an implacable foe for giving Jonas Savimbi's UNITA rebels sanctuary in the DRC, had relied on its Atlantic Ocean flank to supply weaponry in an alliance with Uganda and Rwanda that led to the defeat of Congo's ailing despot. But as a result of interlocking issues that arose, Angola in 1998 defended DRC's new leader Laurent Kabila, who marshaled further support from Namibia, Chad, Sudan and Zimbabwe against Uganda and Rwanda, who he accused of aggression and looting the resource-rich eastern DRC. The war, which convulsed Uganda's neighboring state, resulted into the death of millions and the plunder of minerals, among others. In February 2022, the Hague-based International Court of Justice ruled that Uganda should pay 1.1 trillion shillings, a middle-of-the-road settlement, far less than the 11 billion US dollars, which is the equivalent of 38 trillion Uganda shillings that Kinshasa had earlier on claimed for the loss of lives, plunder, looting and exploitation of minerals during its occupation. When M23 bands captured Bunagana in June 2022, the Speaker of the DRC National Assembly and key ally of President Felix Tshisekedi, Christophe Mboso, moved a motion to suspend all military and economic agreements between Kinshasa and Kampala.
DRC has a lot of resources, certainly, and anybody who wants to fish in troubled waters would do that in Eastern DRC because the resources are available, and the state absence then gives leeway to different types of companies and groups to exploit the space.
Fears continue to stalk DRC that supremacy fights might spark a regional conflict. Regional analysts claim that M23 is divided into two cohorts, one paying allegiance to Kigali and another to Kampala. In June 2000, Uganda and Rwanda engaged in a 6-day trench war during a series of armed confrontations between two former allies around the city of Kisangani in the DRC. The conflict formed part of the wider Second Congo War that lasted from 1998 to 2003. Kisangani was also a scene of fighting between Rwandan and Ugandan troops in August 1999 and 5th May 2000. However, the conflicts of June 2000 were most lethal and seriously damaged a large part of the city with more than 6,600 rounds fired.
And I think for me, this time around, in fact, it may be that we actually get a lasting solution to the problem, because for a very long time, the East African countries were disengaged. Even as a bloc, they were not interested. I mean, 30 years when the problem first arose. So the DRC joining the East African community, I think it was a game changer, so that the countries of the region now realize that in order to have that integration logic of expanding the market.
However, Kampala recently scored a major diplomatic coup when its ally, former DRC Vice President Pierre Bemba, was appointed Deputy Premier for Defense and Mbusa Nyamwisi as Minister for Regional Integration. Bemba was previously detained for over 10 years at the International Criminal Court and released in 2018. He spent 11 years in custody after a war crimes warrant was issued in regard to the conflict in the neighboring Central African Republic. Bemba's movement for the liberation of Congo received both covert and overt support from Kampala between 1998 and 2002, while Nyamwisi's RDCD, Kisangani rebel faction, was also a key ally of Kampala. As the region continues to seek for peaceful settlement in regard to the conflict, the East African Community Chiefs of Defense Forces convened on 9 February 2023 in Nairobi, Kenya, as a follow-up of the 20th Extraordinary Summit of the EAC Heads of State held in Bujumbura on 4th February 2023 to evaluate the security situation in eastern DRC. The meeting was attended by the chiefs of defense forces from DRC, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi to consider the report compiled by defense experts who had met a day earlier in Nairobi in a meeting chaired by Burundi's General Prime Niyongabo. According to a classified document seen by NTV, there has been a realignment of the East African Community Regional Force. 2 UPDF battalions will be deployed in the areas of Bunagana, Chiwanja, Rushuru and Mabenga areas.
Where we deployed, these are the areas that were occupied by M23, to be specific. And at a certain point before our deployment, this area was declared, a state of emergency was declared by the Congolese government. And since the signing of the ceasefire agreement, we have been trying to see that this takes effect by deploying our own forces under the East African Community Joint Regional Force. To date, I can confirm that the area of Bunagana, the area of the territory of Rushuru territory, and Kiwanja in general has been fully occupied. And our forces are moving on into other areas that are supposed to be occupied, especially those still being held by M23. And these areas we have occupied, M23 has cooperated and they have withdrawn.
While Burundi will deploy in Sake, Kirolirwe and Kichanga, Kenyan forces will take command of Chibumba, Rumangabo, Tongo, Bwiza and Kishishe, and South Sudan will deploy in Rumangabo and co-locate with the Kenyan contingent. All these areas are located in the war-racked North Kivu province in eastern DRC. The meeting observed the need for distinct operational boundaries between the contingents for the realigned forces. The regional force was tasked to deal with other rebel groups like the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, and operations would continue against other armed groups including foreign ones like the Allied Democratic Forces ADF, Red Tabara, as well as local armed groups. This is meant to allow for disarmament, demobilization, community recovery and stabilization, which will enable the resettlement of IDPs and the return of refugees to their respective countries of origin. It was agreed that the Status of Forces Agreement, signed on 8 September 2022, should be renewed. The experts preferred that adherence to the ceasefire by all parties is critical to the implementation of all directives by the Heads of State Summit in Bujumbura. Some incidents of ceasefire violations have been registered since the Bujumbura Summit, and the warring parties must unconditionally cease hostilities with immediate effect, reads part of the summit report. The meeting observed that the previous withdrawal timelines directed by the Luanda and Nairobi processes, as well as by the CDF's and CDC's meetings in Bujumbura and Dar es Salaam, were not adhered to. During the meeting, it was decided that the new withdrawal timelines must be adhered to by all warring factions.
Recently, another good news is we had what they call expanded joint verification mechanism team that visited our area in Rushuru, and they had quite a lot of discussions. There were presentations from the commanders to show the posture of our troops, how they have deployed. We heard also the presentations from M23 to show what are their concerns and what next. It was a very good team, and this is a team that was mandated by the regional heads of state in Nairobi, and they are doing their work well, and that was the first time we got in contact with them. They were looking at about 4 things. Number 1, the posture of our troops, as I have seen, how we have deployed so far. Number 2, to see if there is violation of the ceasefire agreement. Number 3 is to see if these areas are still occupied by negative forces. You know, if DLR is still there, you know Mai Mai, they are still there. So this joint verification mechanism is also to ensure that these negative forces have left these places. They are not within the population. Of course, also they are looking at the entire operational process of the joint forces.
To facilitate the new timelines, it was agreed that the ceasefire must be in place in order to facilitate the organized and coordinated withdrawal of the M23. There is need to establish a monitoring and verification mechanism and the concurrent withdrawal of all armed groups, and the deployment of the regional force in the vacated areas and areas earmarked for M23's phased withdrawal and the protection of civilians in areas vacated by M23. The meeting decided that the withdrawal of M23 would be phased over a period of 30 days. The current crisis erupted in November 2021, when the largely defunct March 23 movement, M23 militant group, carried out lightning strikes on military positions of the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo in the villages of Chanzu and Runyonyi in North Kivu province, just west of the Ugandan and Rwandan borders. This occurred the same month that the Ugandan forces were deployed to the province to pursue the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, a Ugandan rebel group that also operates in North Kivu and Ituri. In October and November 2021, Uganda had been the target of suicide bomb attacks that President Yoweri Museveni blamed on the ADF. By March 2022, M23 had seized key parts of Rushuru territory bordering Uganda and Rwanda. In May, they overran the Rumangabo military base, the DRC Army's largest military installation in North Kivu. They then pushed south toward the provincial capital of Goma and across Rwanda's border city of Gisenyi. In June, another M23-pronged operating further north overran the border city of Bunagana, forcing Congolese soldiers to flee to Uganda.